morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We've got a really great panel set up for you today. We're going to spend the next 30 minutes or so talking about the challenges that startup companies face in getting early market traction, in getting your initial customers, and in finding that all-important product market fit. So the first question that I wanted to ask was around, there's obviously a lot of learnings as you go through this journey in building a company. And so I wanted to ask our panelists, what is that one thing that you've learned through the journeys that you've taken that's really stuck with you, whether that was because it was a success, something that led to your success, or because it was something that maybe resulted from something that didn't go very well. So Pete, can you maybe start us off, and then I'd ask Moti and JP to weigh in as well?
Yeah, sure. So I think it was the most important kind of takeaway with respect to making sure, starting you on the right path to product market fit. Is that right? Yeah. I think one of the things that we did a really good job with at my current company, Atrium, we make sales performance analytics software that we didn't do at my previous company, TalentBin, which is a recruiting software company that was acquired by Monster, was we were very intentional with our customer research at the beginning of our entrepreneurial journey with Atrium. So we were very intentional about doing structured customer development research. There's a really fantastic article in First Round Review called Get in the Van. It's written by Michael Sippy, who used to lead product at Twitter way back in the day. And it talks about how to do very good structured customer research in order to make sure that you're not, climbing a local maximum, to make sure that you're really addressing a problem that people have. So I think that was a really big thing that has led to our success at Atrium. And then leveraging the people that you meet along that journey while you're doing that intentional customer research. We did about 150 customer interviews across a couple dozen personas to then populate a customer advisory panel, even at the earliest stages. So you kind of, as you're finding compelling people, you kind of throw them in your backpack and bring them along with you. There's another article on First Round Review that I wrote on customer advisory panels. So those two things, like starting right, will really kind of point you in the right direction.
Great. Moti?
I think that the one thing that I took away from my previous company, we got to $15 million of ARR and sold the company. We were executing very well, quarter after quarter. But the one takeaway is that revenue is not sufficient to determine whether you got to product market fit. So you can hustle your way from 1 to 10, and sometimes even beyond that, even 100 million. There are some companies that went public that did not get to product market fit. So we can talk more about that. But in fact, revenue can be a distraction at the beginning if you're focusing only on revenue and not on the fundamentals of solving a pain point and so forth. We're going to talk about it later, I guess.
Yeah.
For me, the biggest learning moment in the early days was when our very first account, a big enterprise account for us at the time, a few $100K in ARR, very proud, great validation of our strategy. We just get going. We start sending other accounts. The very first account starts not using the product, giving every indication that they're about to churn. So, not using the product, like when it's 500,000 accounts, led to us reacting to it, changing our product actually. Eventually we managed to salvage the relationship, but the product came out completely different. Our strategy completely changed. That's the moment that we stumbled upon the first snag, the first difficulty. Until then we thought we had it down and everything was going according to plan. And that was very, very important for us to react. And it was also very lucky that we had that problem. Had we not had that problem, we would have continued with a product that just wouldn't have succeeded. So I can talk more about why, but difficulties is where you learn actually. And if they come in early, you're lucky. Like you get an opportunity to really react and adapt.
Great. So I think most people would say when this concept around product market fit that it's pretty easy to assess product market fit when you're looking backwards, kind of through the lens of history. It's much harder to figure out, do we have product market fit in the moment where you're starting to build your business and you're starting to gain traction. So maybe Moti, maybe you can start us off with this question, which is, how do you define product market fit? And how can one determine if there's truly a market for the product or services that they're building?
Sure. So I think first of all, product market fit is a state, okay? And I would define the state as a point in time where you have a product that's addressing a very clear pain point with a repeated use case, well-defined buyer, and that you're able to generate revenue from that. Now, revenue by itself, as I mentioned before, is not enough. And I would add to that, and this is a pretty complicated definition, I agree with you. We'll dive into some signals of how you actually assess that. But then you need to have also sufficient customers that are buying into all of this, right? So you can have, quote unquote, product market fit with 20 customers. That's not product market fit because you don't have a market, right? So qualitatively, it's when you actually feel that the market is sort of sucking the product from you, right? Customers are willing to take your product even when it's buggy. When you talk to the customers, they don't tell you, just add that feature or that feature and then call me back. No, they are taking it now with what you have at the moment, right? So that's a very kind of qualitative way. Some signals to understand whether you're in product market fit. One, I believe in usage, right? So you need to see repeated, consistent usage of the product. That is something that you can passively measure, right? It's not like a survey, right? You need to measure and see exactly that people are using it. Another signal that is sort of, again, you can measure it, you don't have to ask the customer, and that is from the sales force, right? So if salespeople are attaining, and this is a rule that I came up with, we can argue about this, but if 80% or more of your salespeople are attaining quota, then you have something there. Now, of course, maybe less than 80%, and maybe you created a comp plan that is wrong or whatnot, but more often than not, if the salespeople are hitting quota, then you have something there. From a lead perspective, you have continuous lead flow. You see that the market, again, is coming to you. It's not that you're trying to dig underneath the surface trying to find those customers. Now, there is one, I don't know if we mentioned this, that my perspective is obviously from a B2B perspective, right? Enterprise software. There is the famous, I think Sean Ellis said that if you survey your customers and they ask them what would they say if you took away their product, right? And he said that if 40% say that they would be very disappointed, then you got to product market fit. I think that's a great metric, but it doesn't apply really to B2B. Sometimes you don't have the sample size for that. Mm-hmm. So that's why I'm kind of looking at other signals around it, trying to understand. Maybe one more comment, if you have time, in terms of revenue, especially in the 1 to 10 million phase. If you start generating revenue, it can potentially distract you, because then many times you start your board meetings with, okay, what's the revenue? What are the revenue targets? And the entire focus becomes on revenue, whereas if you don't have the fundamentals and you're not solving a repeated kind of use case, you have a clear buyer or whatnot, you start executing towards revenue, and that could take you off track.
Great. JP?
I agree a lot. I mean, I would phrase it in a different way. I would say that you have product market fit when you provide value consistently to a customer, and I think everything flows from that. If you provide value, they're going to renew. The sales motions are going to be a lot easier. And back to my earlier story of my customer churning, I was misled, like reading a lot of literature on product market fit. I was misled by some maybe simplistic definitions where you have 10 customers, right? You have product market fit. Where we had 10 customers, and our first customers started churning. Yeah. So obviously we didn't have product market fit, meaning that the value was not there, or we were not executing towards the value that we had promised, but there was a very big problem. And it's with a very large number, much larger than 10 number of customers, that we felt we were safe. And we say, okay, they're getting the value, they're advocates for us, they want to renew, and now we feel like we have product market fit. So if you can measure that value, sometimes it's intangible, but if you can measure that value effectively, if there's a particular metric, to say, okay, we save you this many on-call hours a year, or whatever it is that will measure objectively the value in your business. If you have that, and if you have that at 10 accounts consistently, then you start getting to the place where, okay, I'm passing to a different stage and I can start investing in scaling. But before that, it's not necessarily 10 sales, because companies will take a chance on a startup, right? They will buy not just what you can do in a short term, but also what you promise to do over the next 12 months. So there's still a lot of discovery when you have your initial customers that will happen. You don't know whether they're going to stick around. So it's not the 10 sales, it's really more like the 10 customers that derive a lot of value, and then you can build from there.
I think that Moti's point about being over-indexed on revenue and using that as an end-all be-all signifier of that, like, utility is being achieved is a bit of a head fake. The important thing to what JP points out is that you want to be seeing customers that you sell who then achieve the promised utility. Right, so one of our investors at Atrium is a gentleman named Sarker. He's a GP at Charles River Ventures, and he kind of taught me this about 6 years ago when he was an investor in our first company, about just very much focusing on the utility component of things, making sure that you are delivering that value that was promised and that that is priced appropriately. We had this problem at Talent Bin. I talk about this I wrote a book on sales for founders called Founding Sales, where kind of essentially cataloging all the failures we had at Talent Bin. And one of the things we had was we sold a bunch of Talent Bin, right, to engineering recruiters, to technical recruiters, but then they didn't end up actually using the software. They didn't end up getting the utility out of it that was promised. And so, we were running around doing the happy dance that we had, a couple hundred of these customers. Maybe they were like VPs of engineering, or maybe they were, fill in the blank, but they weren't necessarily achieving the utility in question. And so I think that's really important to understand, that somebody is achieving the utility that was promised. And then what you can do is you can index, you can instrument that. One way of doing that is usage. Another kind of maybe ballsier way of going about that is doing MRR-based accounting. So Drift, folks are probably familiar with Drift. It's a conversational intelligence, or it's not conversational intelligence, conversational marketing software company run by some of the guys who founded HubSpot. Their entire business, at least for the first 2 years of their existence, was month-to-month MRR based. It's pretty aggressive, right? Because having a 12-month contract is kind of nice to give yourself time to prove value. But they actually decided as a strategic goal to only do month-to-month, in order to compel them to focus on delivering utility as quickly as possible. Slack does something similar, where you only pay for the people who are using Slack in a given time interval, versus selling a 12-month contract for like 1,000 seats, even if only 200 get used. So I think, focusing on delivering the utility and then making sure that you're instrumenting that, whether it's from an explicit numeric signifier like the ones we've discussed, or even qualitative ones like NPS, making sure that you're consistently net promotion scoring your user base, or even more qualitative things like, are your customers referenceable? If you emailed all your customers and said, like, hey, we're putting together some slides, would you be down to put your face on there and give us a quote on the utility that you're getting from our offering? If people come back and are wildly stoked on that, or if they're referring other customers into your organization, that's a good thing. If the response to that is like, I'm not so sure about that, or like just silence, that's kind of a problem.
Okay, great. Well, I think we've got about 10 minutes left, and I wanted to make sure that we were able to take questions from all of you. So if folks have any questions, please, I think we have mics going around the room. Any questions for our panelists?
What do you start?
Every founder, including myself, is a salesperson. We have to be salesperson. So my question is that you will always be the salesperson.
Sure.
When do you stop being the salesperson as a founder? And when you hire a first salesperson or a first VP of sales, it's not easy for founders to give up that.
Right.
It is not easy to trust somebody else will sell it as effective as you are. So my question is, what is the transition?
I can give a shot at this. So I think you have a presumption in your statement there, which I think is a good one, which is that the founder does need to be doing sales initially. I think that's actually extremely important. It's kind of the crux of the Founding Sales, the book I wrote, and a lot of the speaking I do is that you really can't outsource initial go-to-market to somebody else. You can't delegate that. It really has to be done by the business founder to kind of map the initial sales motion. Now that said, it's the recipe, it's a recipe for non-leverage for you to continue to be the heroic salesperson going forward. The idea of early go-to-market is you're mapping the sales software, if you will, like the recurring sales motion, and then the whole idea is you want to put that into the brains of as an initial set of salespeople who then instrument them getting to success. At that point, and if they don't, iterate the sales motion. If they do get to success, great, clone that and double it up, for instance. And that's kind of the point at which, okay, cool, if we see that this is repeatable for somebody that's other than me, and it's repeatable at a statistically significant scale, and it's not just one other person, it's maybe 3 other people or 4 other people, okay, that's probably the point at which you can move your attention to higher leverage activities like hiring more of those humans, putting the systems in place to scale them, et cetera.
Great. Do you guys want to add anything?
Yeah, maybe. So I didn't get to the stage where I had the luxury of stopping and essentially trusting my team. We were acquired recently and relatively early in our development. But if I can share my goal for the next company, it really is to try not to assume that I'm going to be the initial go-to-market team or in the initial go-to-market team from the very, very beginning. Why? Because it's extremely hard to achieve that. You need to instrument your product. You need to think from the inception about how you're going to structure your product in terms of the effort it will take to onboard the product, the value, how the value will be explanatory or very, very evident to enable someone else other than you, not to explain all the technicalities and the vision and everything that goes into building these awesome products, but make it super easy. So my goal is actually to try to achieve that, and I know it's not going to happen, right? But my goal will be to make it possible for someone else to really, with the same effectiveness as the founder, to take the product to market. And I think the companies that really scale fast and very well achieve that transition from founders to essentially just scalability and delegating the team, delegating the go-to-market entirely to the non-founders, to the team. They achieve that earlier.
Okay. Maybe the minute that you have a playbook that you can really hand out to a sales guy or girl, right? That's the point that you can kind of step back. But in general, as a founder CEO, you never stop selling. So maybe you won't be selling directly to customers, but you need to sell obviously to your employees, to your investors, to the partners. You always are in a selling mode.
Great.
So we're going to take 2 more questions, and after that, panelists will be available to talk offline, right?
Thank you for all your time. Most of the discussions were around products. We are a company, have certain intellectual property and building solutions. So in the aspect of selling solutions, like consulting services or practice building, what are the lessons or aspects from your product startups that can still be applicable on a solution selling or a consulting practice world?
Anyone?
I've only sold products.
Same here.
Well, let me try to, same here, but let me try to say something useful. So we were selling a service. It was software, but essentially it was sold as a service. And the one thing I learned is that you really need to put yourself in the shoes of the customer and really understand their workflows, like the problem that you're solving, not just in general, but for them specifically. And at the end of the day, you need to wrap around your particular service in their context, and that takes a lot of understanding of their particular situation. And so there's a little bit of a discovery approach, consulting approach that goes into selling us like software as a service as well. I think the learning there is that you never, like you can't be like a team of software developers only. You really have to be very, very close to the customer and understanding their use case, right? You almost have to be a former colleague. Like you have to talk in their terms. It's the same for solution selling, essentially. You need to use a specific language. You need to really come with the credibility that you come from the industry. I think that's the analogy or the parallel. Like you really need to understand the customer's industry and use case very well. I don't know if that helps.
One last question. Go ahead.
Hello, hi, I'm Aman. I'm doing my startup in the trucking space, logistics. So my question is on the enterprise B2B space. How important are the margins for the first year of the startup like ours? Like, will the investor be more impressed in me showing a sale of, let's say, $2 million in a year with 15% margins, or a $15 million sales with hardly any margin, early single digits, or maybe even at a loss? Would love to know your perspective on this.
So the question is, how important are margins early on? Yes. You're in B2B though, right? Yeah. I mean, I think early on what you want to do, the question we were talking about earlier about delivering utility and making sure that your early customers are just wildly successful. Oftentimes the way that ends up happening, and I don't know exactly how your business works, is an over-investment in like customer success, right? So in my current company right now, we have 4 account executives and a head of sales, and we have 2 CS people. But when I was the only AE founder, we had 2 customer success people, which is kind of expensive for a few dozen customers. And so if you look at those margins, you'd be like, wow, that's kind of crappy. Do you anticipate that you're going to have a ratio of like 1 customer success manager to 10 customers, each of whom have an ASP of like $30K a year? That's kind of a crappy ratio. Our response to that is like, no, we wouldn't anticipate that would be like that at scale. But early on, we made the decision to overinvest with humans, so like use humans to paper over crappy product, or like, not crappy product, early product. But I think what you need to make sure that you have an eye towards is that always going to be like that? Is that a core are you always going to need that? Or is it something where you were just over-investing at the very beginning, but then you would anticipate that smoothing out? We were actually talking about the conversation intelligence space earlier, companies like Gong and Chorus and what have you, Zoom. I mean, they actually have pretty hardcore baked in like costs. Like it turns out running Zoom is not easy because you're throwing video all over the internet, or recording calls and transcribing them is computationally intensive or what have you. So if you don't anticipate that that's going to change over time, well then, yeah, you're going to have to be aware of that. But if you do think that with scale those margins will change and it's actually credible and defensible, then I wouldn't worry about it early on, and as long as you're getting those great like utility signifiers, right?
Maybe,
yeah, I mean, I think that's a question for VCs really. In the first year, trying to sell, trying to grow, you will be losing money, right? You will be losing money for the first 5 years, in fact, if you're lucky. So how important is it for VCs? As long as you understand where your unit economics are, and you have a plan, like a rationale for why you're investing. As long as you really have the metrics, you don't try to hide it, you're not surprised when they ask you the questions,
right? And
you have a path for how it's going to improve going forward, and if VCs that's credible, I think you're good. But you're going to lose money no matter what. Like that's just the nature of the game.
All right, well, I think we're done with our panel. Thank you all for your participation. Thank you to our panelists.